But joining us to share his view on the Numsa strike and the current wage negotiations is Tony Healy. He's a labour analyst from Tony Healy and Associates. Good to have you with us today, Tony. As you heard Steve mentioning, 10% rather for a one-year agreement. Is this a compromise or unrealistic expectations from Numsa's perspective?
Well, I think it's a bit of both. It is a compromise. They've come down from their 12 to 15% original demand. But of course, the employers are pushing very hard for a 3-year deal, because a 3-year deal does give them industrial peace over that period of time. So I think what's going to happen now is there's going to be a discussion around what kind of potential 3-year deal is possible in terms of a compromise, or whether in fact the employers are willing to accept Steve's proposal of 10% for 1 year.
From an economic perspective, do you think the companies can afford this? We saw what happened with the platinum sector strike and what that did to Amplatz's numbers this morning that were published. Can the engineering in society afford this 10% increase?
Well, Gugu, it's such a big industry. Excuse me, there are certain of those employers probably can and others can't. You might find that the bigger employers can, and the smaller employers with say 10 to 12 employees will struggle to pay a 10% increase, and certainly a 10% increase for the next year for each year over the next 3 years.
Tony, I've been reading the communiques from NIASA, who look after the smaller employers, and it really doesn't make good reading at all. How do you advise those companies that have got 10 to 12 employees? Because it appears as though even if 1 or 2 of them are Numsa members, the Numsa cadres arrive there and stop work and stop them from working. They've been there's dozens literally of reports of intimidation, violence, destruction to property, etc. How do you advise when your clients, when the law doesn't seem to be applying in this case?
Well, the dilemma is exactly that, Alec, in the sense that regardless of the size, pretty much, you fall within the jurisdiction of this particular bargaining council. So those smaller employers are typically the employers who suffer the most and find it most difficult to pay the kinds of wages that are being discussed at this point in time, around the 10% mark. The most that one can really do is recommend to those clients that they seek exemptions from certain aspects of the obligations when it comes to the payment of wages, when that comes to minimum wages, and also when that comes to benefits. But it's a difficult process. Exemptions are not granted easily, and you're quite right. It is the smaller employers who really suffer in this whole bargaining council system.
For employers who are looking at the situation, we've seen strikes unfolding in various sectors across the South African economy. Do you think that from an employer's perspective, they might change their strategies going forward when it comes to labour, maybe instituting more mechanization perhaps going forward?
Well, there's no doubt that insofar as an employer can, mechanization and automation is indeed an option, and we're starting to see that in a number of industries, and that's not necessarily a new phenomenon. But of course there are certain other industries where it's more difficult, for example in hospitality industry. So one can mechanize and automate in certain industries, but not in all.
It was very interesting when Gerard Papenfuss was here a little while ago from NIASA in our studio. He said that a survey they'd done amongst their members, people who own businesses, said that 80% of them would shut up shop if they possibly could. If anybody would offer them anything approaching the value of those businesses, they would do so. Aren't we getting ourselves into a situation here where we won't be able to, A, encourage new people to start businesses in this sector, and B, even keep those existing companies going?
I think that's right, and I think it's really an indictment on the bargaining council system, where you have minimum wages prescribed over such a key industry type, such as metal and engineering. You know, the industries that absorb jobs are very much your light and medium-sized manufacturing and metal and industry type entities, and they can go a long way to addressing many of the job loss problems and job creation challenges that we are faced with. For example, if you are a welder and you're willing to work for less than the current minimum hourly rate, you're prevented and prohibited from doing so. So it stifles job creation. So I think the problem lies very much in the fact that we have the bargaining council system, which puts certain prohibitive wage levels on smaller employers and dampens job creation, and indeed makes it difficult for them to even break even.
Is this something that somebody should be lobbying the new Minister of Small Enterprises or Small Businesses?
I think it's a golden opportunity, Alec, in the sense that we have that new ministry. It's something that should be indeed lobbied, and there has to some degree been lobbying around this particular subject and issue for some time, but it flies in the face of the sort of minimum wage agenda of many unions, such as COSATU and even Numsa itself. Andrew Chiro has gone on record very recently as having motivated for minimum wage legislation. So to tackle or oppose the bargaining council system is akin to opposing minimum wage legislation.
So if the government does step in, what kind of measures do they need to put in place to alleviate the situation?
Well, in my view, Gugu, I think that the bargaining council system is problematic. It does stifle job creation. It does increase the barrier of entry for many of the smaller employers. It does make it harder for them to break even. The bigger organizations that have been around perhaps longer, that have international contacts, are more able to ride the wave of recessionary periods, but less so the small to medium-sized employers.
What's this concern that the unions have about labour brokers? Why are they so agitated about that?
Well, I think, Alec, they see, and probably to some degree correctly, that there are many labour brokers who don't provide decent working conditions, reasonable benefits, and pay extremely low wages. So they have concerns around that. And they believe that because they're not as regulated as they believe they should be, that is an abusive relationship between the employees of labour broking companies and the labour brokers themselves. But the fact of the matter is, in my understanding in terms of international research, is that even if we banned labour brokers, it doesn't automatically mean that the same number of employees employed by labour brokers would then be taken up by employers directly. And my understanding is that international research shows that about 75% of employees who up until a point in time had been employed by labour brokers would be absorbed into the mainstream labour market. So I'm a little at a loss in terms of why they insist in promoting this particular agenda item.
Tony Healy is a labour consultant, not a labour broker, and giving us some insights there into what's going on with the Numsa strike and, some of the issues. I get back to that point that was made right in the beginning, that if you have laws, they need to be able to be applied. And in this case, it doesn't seem to be. There we have the visuals, as you saw a little bit earlier, of a guy with a tyre, carrying a tyre in his Numsa shirt. What kind of a message is he trying to send? Well, if you don't join us, you know what's going to happen to you.